film The Celluloid Closet does a thorough job at kind of breaking down the different forms of representing gay and lesbian and gender nonconforming people in film. As I said, from around the 1930s to 1995, when the Celluloid Closet was made. So these are just a few of the ways that we see queer characters represented in terms of the structure that kind of underpins the representation itself or the film itself. So we think about films like Tootsie or Victor Victoria, Mrs. Doubtfire, where we do see characters cross-dressing, but while there is kind of an element of drag, the characters are not seen as queer. So we do have straight actors playing gay. And of course, Tootsie, Victor Victoria, Mrs. Doubtfire all have very different representations of this kind of cross-dressing experience. Um, and but we can hardly kind of fit them in as queer cinema. But they do involve this kind of representation of a certain form of cross-dressing, and that's the kind of language I think that we can use to describe those films because they don't have this explicit queer element. Particularly Tootsie and Mrs. Doubtfire. Then we'll have films that have explicitly queer or trans negative presentations. Um, so in the Celluloid Closet, they look at the Children's Hour from 1963, which has this, spoiler alert, kind of familiar tale of a lesbian coming out and loving someone and then ending her life because of the amount of shame. And this is another one of those films that was used as a cautionary tale. And something like Silence of the Lambs, which constructs its main antagonist as sitting within a trans narrative. A lot of famous kind of scenes that really depict this character as deviant, but that their deviance is very much related to their gender identity or their issues with their own personal gender and representation. And then, of course, Ace Ventura, which has, many of us probably watched as kids, and then, rewatching this later in life, just seeing how explicitly transphobic um, the film is. And so we see these particular elements throughout a lot of different films. And, if you have any examples, please do bring them to class, because once we start kind of unpacking these different tropes, we realize how common they are. So we will see the queer or trans character, particularly the trans character, as a villain. We see this represented as someone who's sexually deviant, who is, potentially, pollutant and trying to kind of, it will use that idea of recruitment that we see in a lot of homophobic tropes. It can be as a humorous side character. So, the gay best friend. So we might see films where, the lead character has a gay friend, and, that friend perhaps does have kind of a fully fleshed out character and personality. But we do often see those characters tokenized, and largely those will be white gay men. Sometimes in film, it seems that mainstream film can only handle, one element of diversity at a time. So there are so fewer representations of, for instance, gay Black men than there are white gay men. And so this idea of, representing a multi-identity is somehow has somehow been propped up as just too much for an audience to handle, which of course we know isn't true. Um, and we can even see how films that have a more negative or limited or tokenizing um, representation of queer, transgender, non-conforming people um, these characters are used to uphold specific norms, which are themselves homophobic or sexist or racist or misogynist or transphobic. And then we kind of move into, later in around the 1990s, we got kind of a swath of mainstream films that may not be completely, may not be necessarily made by queer and trans writers, maybe to some degree, may have a character here and there that is played by someone who's gay, but doesn't present a negative presentation necessarily. And we can think of The Birdcage as a good example. So it's Nathan Lane and Robin Williams. It is a situational comedy. It talks to a lot of anxieties around coming out. It's humorous. The characters are very much constructed in terms of very legible gay stereotypes about gay men, but don't have the same kind of um, narrative structure as things like Silence of the Lambs. And then, of course, we can think about film and television that has been made by and for a queer audience. So, of course, this is maybe more of a modern trend, but there have been queer and trans filmmakers for as long as there have probably been films. We just might not see these, out on the internet, or they might not be available for us. So, um, in Dr. Leung's article about new queer cinema that we read for the class, she looks at underground kind of subcultural art house queer film, and then the slow development of how that scene influenced kind of more mainstream representations of queer and trans people on film and television.